Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you on behalf of the American Bar Association section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. We're another great event for our section's new Rapid Response Program. And this is courtesy of our award-winning Environmental Justice Committee. During the 2017 and 2018 bar year, our goal is to rapidly respond to government action that may impact civil rights and civil liberties by offering these free webinars, commentary, podcasts, and social media posts, and other information from subject matter experts. If you have ideas about programming, we would love to have your participation. Please also email our Associate Director, Paula Shapiro, at paula.shapiro@americanbar.org. We also encourage you to check out the section's website regularly for updates. So as we begin our program, we want you to know that there is the ability for you to ask questions throughout the program. So if you're on the computer, you can click on the right-hand bar and then click on the specific tab for questions and include any questions that you may have. And we'll be monitoring it throughout the program. And so the idea for this program has really arisen because of the concern for the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Puerto Rico. So I'm going to turn over the program to our moderator, Tiffany Sanchez, who is a third-year law student at Berry University School of Law. She is a note and comment editor at Berry Law Review and a second-year competitive advocate for the Moot Court Honors Board and the vice president of the Business and Corporate Law Association. She is interested in corporate law and energy policy and intends to pursue a career in corporate social compliance and sustainable development. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on Hurricane Maria and the aftermath in Puerto Rico. The topic of this webinar is the Department of Defense reports that 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria made landfall, only 5.4% of citizens on the island of Puerto Rico have electricity, while 12.1% have self-service. Communications still remain a challenge on the island, and currently only 14 of Puerto Rico's hospitals had electricity, while 51 were degraded and in need of generators for power. The situation remains dire. So today, our distinguished panelists will discuss the obstacles Puerto Rico faces in the coming days and months ahead to restore electricity, rebuild infrastructure, and meet the basic human needs. Our first guest speaker is Professor Sheila Velez Martinez. Professor Velez Martinez is the Jack and Lovell Allender Professor of Asylum, Refugee, and Immigration Law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. She holds a Juris Doctor from the University of Puerto Rico School of Law. And she is a member of the Board of Directors of LACRIT, which is also known as the Latino and Latina Critical Legal Studies Incorporation. And she also is a member of the Friends and Farm Workers. Professor Velez Martinez joined Pitt Law as a visiting professor in 2010 and established the Immigration Law Clinic. She currently serves as the Directory of Clinical Programs as well as the Immigration Law Clinic. And her academic publications and academic interests include issues related to immigrant women, Puerto Rican migration, Caribbean migration, remittances, legal pedagogy, and al-Crit theory. So without further ado, I'd like to allow Professor Velez Martinez to introduce herself and the topic that she is going to present on.
Well, thank you, Nadia and Tiffany, for this opportunity. Before I say anything, I want to share with you that I'm here today with Rocio Alers and Francisco Blondet. They're both students of the University of Puerto Rico School of Law that are going to be visiting at the University of Pittsburgh this semester as part of an effort in solidarity to allow students that have been affected by Hurricane Maria at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law to finish their semester here at Pitt. This is an initiative that has also been undertaken by other law schools in the United States, and I'm very happy that they're here with me today, and they are also open to answer your questions. They came to Pitt last night, so if anyone has hands-on information of what's going on, are Rocio and Francisco. Puerto Rico is experiencing a humanitarian crisis as a result of Hurricane Maria, which came after Hurricane Irma had already affected the Puerto Rican infrastructure. So Puerto Rico faced 2 hurricanes within a short period of time. And as a consequence of Maria entering Puerto Rico as a Category 4 hurricane, there are several things that have happened. And as Tiffany mentioned, Puerto Rico's power grid has been devastated. As of 2 days ago, 85% of the island had power. I think that this morning that number is back to 85% lacked power. I think that number is back to up the 90s because there was a large power outage yesterday, and areas that had power had lost power as of today. So there's the last number I saw this morning was around 5% of places with electricity in Puerto Rico, and this is the 22nd day. There's 3 weeks post. We are 3 weeks post hurricane, and even though we're 3 weeks post hurricane, there are still hundreds of communities that are isolated, communities that were flooded during the Hurricane Maria and had begun to improve their situation, were also flooded because there is a storm going through Puerto Rico these days. It's too much rain in the last 2 days, and there's been flooding in the San Juan area and in the outside of the metropolitan area. And in some areas, people had to be evacuated again due to the flooding caused by the rains. The rains in the last 2 days have also caused people to have to leave their homes again, because assistance from governmental authorities to help people repair their roofs or to have simply those blue tarps that we're used to seeing after major disasters have yet to reach people. Some areas of the island are still completely inaccessible by the government. The number of people that have died because of Hurricane Maria, it's upward 38, I think, was 43 was the last number by the government. However, lawyers that are counsels for private hospitals in the area and counsels for funeral home have shared with us, the colleagues, that the numbers should be in the hundreds, because there's not an effective way of counting those people that have died and that die every day because they can't access dialysis for dialysis patients, insulin for diabetic patients, people that have heart conditions. As soon as hospitals in Puerto Rico lost power, people that were in life support started passing. So the numbers could be way larger. The situation of how to store corpses is an issue. There's not enough space. There's not enough resources. We've seen in recent days reports of a leptospirosis outbreak in the northeast part of the island due to people using spring water that might have been contaminated by animals' excrement. 2 people have reportedly died, and several other people are in the hospital. Access to medical care is quite dire. There's only, the last number I saw was 5 hospitals fully working in Puerto Rico, and that is certainly not enough to tend to all the medical needs. The lack of power has given rise to other issues regarding contamination, because people are using their gas generators day and night. That is causing respiratory issues in certain communities and affecting people's already limited quality of life and quality of rest. In terms of and this is a natural disaster, but it's also a man-made disaster, and I think that it's very difficult to evaluate this natural disaster without understanding the relationship that the United States and the Puerto Rico have. And I think that all this conversation about Puerto Rico and the U.S. media has allowed people to understand a little better the colonial relationship and how Puerto Ricans relate to the United States, and some of the issues that relate to the lack of ability from the Puerto Rico government and to the U.S. government to correctly and promptly address this comes from that relationship. Puerto Rico has been immersed in a financial crisis for more than 10 years, a debt crisis that has been fully covered by the media. And the response to that crisis was to establish a supra-governmental body in Puerto Rico called the Junta de Control Fiscal, the Fiscal Control Board. And the Fiscal Control Board's job is to be a supra-government and has authority to invalidate all laws and regulations enacted by the Puerto Rico government, because this is a federal body created by Congress to rule over Puerto Rico under the territorial cross. And Promesa, which is the name of the act that created the territorial board, allows for the imposition of further austerity measures. So by the time that Maria hit Puerto Rico, the Fiscal Control Board had already asked the government to lower their employees, to cut the rate of employment, to impose additional austerity measures to the ones that had been imposed. And those austerity measures are part of the problem facing the grid in the sense that union workers from the power authority are saying that for many years, as part of the austerity measures, the grid was not properly maintained. Part of the austerity measures that were imposed include not buying new equipment to repair the equipment that was being damaged. So by the time the hurricane hit, there was already a crisis in the electric power authority, similar to a crisis in the water power authority. It's interesting to note also that the response to the crisis has been inefficient, both by the local government and by the federal government. And it's difficult for me to think that Massachusetts would be 21 days without power, or that Miami would be 21 days without power, or that there would be people without access to water 21 days after an emergency. I think that this is part of the long-standing second-rate citizenship that Puerto Ricans have in regard to the relationship to the U.S. government, and a true lack of interest and effective citizenship. And that is, of course, I'm happy to discuss that further. But the way that the Puerto Rican crisis has been handled differs dramatically, even to the way that the United States responded to the Haiti earthquake years ago. And the other thing is that Puerto Rico, because of the relationship that Puerto Rico has with the United States, it has not been able to secure assistance from its closest neighbors that are willing and able to help. So Cuba has offered help to Puerto Rico. Venezuela offered access to gas to Puerto Rico. There's a crisis of diesel, as has the Dominican Republic, but Puerto Rico, due to the colonial relationship with the United States, is not able to engage in receiving and deciding to receive that help, and it cannot also use international ships to access goods faster than it would from the United States, because the Jones Act prevents that. And the Jones Act was lifted for 10 days, and that waiver was allowed to expire recently because the government says that it was not really helpful. But of course, there's no communications in Puerto Rico. Cell phone towers are down. There's no power. So there's really not an effective way to communicate, to even bring to Puerto Rico needed goods. a further problem that feeds this humanitarian crisis is the inability of the government to distribute the aid that has been arriving in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican diaspora and the citizens of the United States that have been moved by the crisis have been extremely generous and donated millions of pounds of supplies to Puerto Rico, and many of those supplies are sitting in the docks and are not being effectively distributed. So the government has said that it doesn't have the ability to effectively access some communities, which is kind of contradictory because CNN has been able to get there, Ricky Martin has been able to get there, Chef Jose Andres has been able to get there. So there's people that have been able to get there and access those communities and give. We really don't understand how is it that the government is not able to reach those communities. And I'll finish by saying that there are other crises looming, the crisis of the agricultural sector that has lost most of its crops. The coffee harvest had just started. Coffee is an important agricultural business in Puerto Rico, so it's small crops like plantain, which are part of the subsistence agriculture in Puerto Rico and extremely important for the Puerto Rican diet. So the alternative of using local agriculture for people's access to food is not there. It's at this time basically not existent. But that adds to the humanitarian crisis because the local resources are not there to be able to help people or for people to access those resources.
Right, and it just adds to the severity of the situation as well. So thank you for that information, and we look forward to hopefully divulging into more of that intellect further into this webinar. Thank you. Our next speaker is Attorney Bernice Bird. Attorney Bird proudly serves as a family and immigration attorney and civil rights advocate for the Central Florida community. Prior to attending law school, Attorney Bird practiced mental health counseling for 5 years upon earning her master's degree in counseling psychology, graduating summa cum laude from Florida International University in Miami, Florida. Attorney Bird has made the transition to law in 2009 and chose to dedicate her passion to helping people by defending their legal rights. In 2012, she graduated cum laude from Barry University School of Law in Orlando, Florida, and was licensed to practice law in Florida in 2013. After graduation, she relocated to Washington, D.C. and pursued a master's in law at American University, Washington College of Law, graduating summa cum laude with her LLM degree in law and government and a dual specialization in law, politics, and legislation, and gender and the law. Among other accomplishments, Attorney Bird assisted the House Judiciary Committee in drafting the amicus brief defending the contraception coverage mandate of the Affordable Care Act during her tenure as a congressional intern at the House of Representatives. Notably, as of May 4th, 2017, the Bird Law Firm has been granted special accreditation status by the United Nations so as to participate in the creation of the United Nations Global Compact for Light, Orderly, and Regular Migration. Please help me welcome Attorney Bird.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez, for the wonderful welcome. I am very honored to be here and to speak on this very important matter. And I am very honored to speak alongside these distinguished panelists. And thank you, Professor Velez Martinez. You actually have wonderfully laid the foundation with some historical facts to Puerto Rico, which are very relevant to my topic. One of the topic of interest for me will have to do with particular interest, the natural disasters, and how natural disasters can affect civil rights, and with particularity, how these civil rights, how they are breached, how that can affect the class inequality that we see of the refugees coming from Puerto Rico into the mainland United States. I'm going to speak mostly about Florida, because I'm here in Orlando, Florida. And Orlando in particular is known, at least here, to be the large displacement of Puerto Ricans, a large Puerto Rican population, much like Miami is one for the Cuban refugees. This topic of Puerto Rico is particularly special and sensitive for myself, and I believe that perhaps I can speak also alongside our other panelists. Whether you're born stateside, raised stateside, or if you were born and raised on the island, if you have family and friends and you are witnessing what is happening to the island from here or on the island, it hits you. It hits a very, very sensitive chord in your heart. And if you are a civil rights advocate, a professor, an attorney, then you have no other choice but to speak out on this. So I'm very honored to start speaking as to the civil rights that could be affected, which is, I feel, probably a secondary topic that many people don't really think about, natural disasters, how they can affect class inequality. Right now, we are seeing about 15,000 Puerto Ricans fleeing to Orlando, Florida, whether they're here to reunite with their family or to just start completely new lives here. And this is not something that we can prevent. There is no intervention, and really there is no prevention. I believe that's what was brought up. Any federal intervention onto the island as to providing more aid, fixing the infrastructure as of this moment to prevent any further refugee, further fleeing into the mainland states, that's probably not going to happen very quickly, and there continue to be thousands and thousands of people coming over to Florida. Perhaps eventually, as the infrastructure continues to be remedied, then we can see more people remaining on the island, which is something that we hope no one wants to leave their home. But for now, this is something we must expect. We have to accept is that people will be coming to Florida. The state has to figure out a way, the United States has to figure out a way to accommodate them. So then the issue with regard to civil rights has to do with how can the state of Florida, in this case, facilitate integration of the refugees, these Puerto Rican refugees, into the community and into the economy. With regard to the community, with respect, my personal opinion, the most important aspect of this is whether the state of Florida can provide the necessary public assistance to assist a particular population that will be coming in that needs that public assistance until they are able to assimilate and build their lives to a point where they can sustain themselves, because we must think realistically. There are going to be many people coming from municipalities that have been completely devastated. The municipality of San Juan and any other surrounding ones, they may be more better off. You can see some people who are higher socioeconomic status that can remain on the island. They may have electricity at this point. They may be able to survive and stay on the island. However, many others, their municipalities have been completely devastated. There is no way they're going to stay there. Perhaps if they're poor enough, there's no way they're coming here. But if they do have the means, perhaps by family flying them over here, they're going to come over here to Florida. But they're not going to have immediate money and ability to support themselves. They're going to have to rely on the state of Florida in this case. As a family attorney, I see this a lot with regard to single mothers, for example, who they have to get food stamps, for example, to provide for themselves and their children. In Florida, if there does happen to be a father that is locatable, listed on the birth certificate in Florida, will be able to pursue the biological father to basically have the father support the child. Basically under the policy that no child that has two parents will become a ward in the state. But in this situation, we're going to have thousands of people who will need that assistance. And there's really nothing we can do about that. Like I said, there is no way to prevent that. Now, my concern is, in the way of economics, if you think about it, my concern is we're going to have such a sudden influx, such a large influx of unexpected thousands of people coming in. So a very high demand of people needing this assistance. And is it possible that the state will not have the supply of monies to assist? This is not to criticize the state's ability to assist in general, to provide public assistance to the people, but in my opinion, as of this moment, due to this natural disaster, it may be unprecedented. For decades already, it's unprecedented to see, again, 15,000 people just now. Who knows how many thousands of people will be coming thereafter to come over. A very large portion of that population will need assistance, require the money. Will the state of Florida have that extra money to disperse? And not in a delayed manner, because we must think also bureaucratically. Sometimes it cannot be processed in the timeline that people need it. It happens a lot with disbursement of state aid, for example. So what will happen, what could happen, this is something that I do not hope for, I hope to never see it, this portion of Ricans may become an underclass. So this goes to my second point, which how to protect this particular refugee class is to help these refugees integrate into the economy. So here, how do we promote economic integration? How do we make this underclass an equal class? Well, let's talk about the different refugee groups. As I look at it, the first group is, these are going to be the people who are the participants in the brain drain. We're going to see a lot of people coming from Puerto Rico, coming from the island, who are the professors, the doctors, the lawyers, the one who can contribute to high capital, the human capital flight. These are the people who could be contributing greatly to the economy on the island, however, they cannot, because they cannot participate in the courthouses, there are no lawsuits available, the schools are closed, there's no way to literally stay for jobs. So they have to fly over here, flee over here to Florida, in this case, to pursue the jobs. Now, in this case, it is actually good for Florida, because we can see, hopefully, higher work productivity, hopefully higher per capita income, more stimulated economy in the state of Florida. Many of these professionals could open small businesses, which again would stimulate the economic shift in Florida. However, again, there's a second group, and these are the people who I was speaking about before, the potential underclass. These are the people who need the public assistance. They may not get that public assistance because, again, this sudden, increasingly surprising high demand of people who need the assistance, they get it. Living enough in 5 minutes. No. So how do we supplement the state's ability to provide assistance? And this is where I would propose something to consider, and something that I'm seeing, again, with Professor Velez's observation of private donations, private assistance, private alliances, not just from individuals, however, to donate money, food, other requirements in order to sustain shelter, because that's just donations to help people survive.
Hello. No, está aquí. Ahí, yo la veo. Bueno, la escucho.
Hello, ¿me escuchan?
Yo lo escucho. It's Professor Velez Martinez. I can hear you.
Sí,
Can you hear me?
La
So
primera
Carlos,
no
is this
sé,
Carlos? I think that you can go on, right? Let me ask Tiffany.
que no se escucha.
¿Usted me escucha a mí?
Sí, a usted sí.
¿Y usted oye la música?
Oigo la música, pero no escucho a la panelista.
No, pero la penalista, yo no creo que esté hablando.
Sí, bueno, yo veo la mímica en los labios.
Ah, porque como usted la ve, yo no la veo.
En webcam.
Había justo que es que este está mi otro screen. Too many screens.
Sorry, everyone. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're going to be with you again in a minute.
Okay.
Yo no veo a nadie. Carlos, ¿y cómo usted lo puede ver a ella? Porque yo no veo a nadie.
Ahora, por alguna razón, lo que pasa es que esto dice the session is being recorded, y eso, pero cuando yo le di webcam, prendí mi cámara, entonces me salió la de la profesora Nadia.
Ah, porque yo no tengo my webcam prendida. A lo mejor hay que... Let me see, share my webcam.
Ahora,
¿Usted me ve?
sí,
¿Y por qué yo no lo veo?
¿ya?
No. You everyone.
Ahora, usted tiene una chaqueta amarilla,
Sí. Yo no me veo ni a mí. Y yo tengo tantas, que yo tengo 3 screens.
sí.
Carlos, would you be able to then talk a bit while we try to figure out why we can't hear everyone else?
Oh, can everybody hear us?
Yes.
Oh, we did not realize that. I'm sorry.
Hola.
Carlos, que comience su exposición.
Ok, sí, déjame buscarla. Due to technical difficulties, I will be talking a little bit about Puerto Rico and the area that I practice, even though we had this difficulty, which hasn't talked about my profile or my background, where I'm an attorney, dedicate my practice to the energy industry. I attend to the Pontificia Universidad Católica Puerto Rico, graduate my JD, and then I pursue a master's degree studying in the energy field and environment at the University of Houston, which I graduated a couple of years ago. Since then, I have been dedicated all my practice to the energy industry and regulatory and legal framework. Basically, that I have written some articles that have been published in peer reviews, etc. But and I work particularly for an NGO back then, Somos Solar, which is a NGO that promote renewable energy, particularly solar energy.
How come we can't
And
hear
also,
what Nadia's saying?
hello?
Sorry, I was on the. I don't know.
Should I continue or stop?
Yes, please continue. I apologize.
Yes, Carlos, continue, and then I'll add something that after you speak. Okay.
So I have been for the past years and being a law school professor in the energy in Puerto Rico, and I would like to send the opportunity as professor and speaker Ms. Velez explained a little bit earlier ago. Yes, Puerto Rican infrastructure has been heavily impacted by Hurricane Maria. We're talking about most of the transmission and distribution part of the grid is down. But as an attorney, I want to focus more the impact that Hurricane Maria will have on our regulatory and legal framework, particularly on the precept of the Constitution and how this Republican form of government may likely right now is very strange how it seems handling, because, for example, I just returned from I flew from Puerto Rico to Orlando after the hurricane, and
I'm not sure who's muted this.
hello.
Carlos, go on.
Okay, and that's the main question when we're talking about the Republican form of government. Who is gonna make the call? Is the governor? will be the federal government. It will be the oversight board or the fiscal board, PROMESA. Who is going to be the decision maker on the regulatory framework, constitutional framework in Puerto Rico? The process of adjudication of auctions on and how decisions are going to be taken by the government or by the governments or by the public utility. And those questions arise basically because who is going to be impact of the decisions that the government will be taking, hard decisions, good decision, bad decision, but those person would have a due process to challenge those decisions. How will be our regulatory and legal framework affected after Hurricane Maria? Does attorneys or people will file online? Are we going to go paper? Unfortunately, internet and how, like Attorney Velez mentioned, there's no communication is down in Puerto Rico, mainly the internet. You can go to Westlaw or any kind of server like that. Banks are practically closed and you cannot have either phone. In some occasions when I need to talk to my family, I call someone that then he goes drive half an hour, go to the other person, and we start passing the message until they tell me, okay, your family is okay. And then they go back to me on the message until we're like, okay, thank God. So what would be the couple questions? What would be the reconstruction of the grid of Puerto Rico electric transmission distribution system? Puerto Rico electric system is a vertically integrated system controlled by just one utility. Thus, this will be the opportunity to open to competition the electric grid. What will be the jurisdiction, or what is the jurisdiction right now of the Puerto Rico Energy Commission, who was in charge of approving an integrated resource plan to update the electric grid? Or we are not going to have those administrative agencies or commission working, and the decision will be taken by the governor office and not by the people appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. Those questions arise as an attorney after the aftermath of this crisis, and I understand that we're in a crisis and decisions must be taken, but how then will be providing access to justice, access to legal service, and how the most vulnerable people will perhaps not be the most effective one of those decisions. A lot of news, and I read peer reviews and articles talking about microgrids, community solar as the solution for Puerto Rico. Since I've been in Florida as after the hurricane, because I experienced the hurricane, I was there while Maria was in the island. I have read and heard, and a lot of people have approached, hey Carlos, what do you think? But the problem is microgrid. Under Act 133 of 2016, Puerto Rico should enact regulatory framework and regulations to open and to the microgrid program. Unfortunately, there's no regulations of microgrid. There's no regulation of community solar right now. To interconnect, and a lot of people also say, oh, let's go renewable. Well, to interconnect renewable energy to the energy grid, you need a permit to operate from the utility. But the utility right now and the agencies in charge of giving that permit, they're not operating. So in some cases, it's a life trend. A lot of cases, it's a matter of life or death for people. Do I need to connect my generator or power generator or solar system without the utility person because I need to connect, because I need energy to provide to a dialysis patient or an asthma patient, or do I wait for the permit? Those questions arise every day, and how will be the structure and the decision making of the people of Puerto Rico aftermath. I think that honestly we need to reconsider our agencies, jurisdiction and competence, Puerto Rico agency and jurisdictions and competence, our regulatory framework regarding electric utility, and most important, access to justice. Access to justice to the most vulnerable. Right now I'm in Florida. A lot of people want to fly in with their child. I'm not a family attorney, but courts need to give permission in some cases to fly the kids. Those part of the states, particularly Florida, Texas, where people are emigrating, are gonna allow Puerto Rico attorneys to provide legal advice just about Puerto Rican matters for all those people that they are here, because where those people are in Florida, they're unable to fly into Puerto Rico to get legal advice. And they cannot call to an attorney because there's no communication, effective communication means. So that's a challenge that I bring to the table to perhaps rethink the way, and it's not, I'm not promoting an unauthorized practice of law. I'm just a concern that I do have is there's a lot of people flying out of Puerto Rico. Attorney Bird talked about 10, 15,000 people. Those people might need legal service about their asset in Puerto Rico and their family issues. And from an energy attorney, I think that this is the most most of the agreements talk about force of major clause, and this is the first time that I've seen that, or one of the couple times that this clause, the force of major clause, will be talked about, because this force of major also can will be used. The security companies were gonna go bankrupt, insurance company were gonna go bankruptcy because they cannot sustain. So those questions arise, and particularly what will happen with all these companies that they cannot operate in Puerto Rico because of the damage and the employment issue that would happen or will suffer the island because there's no job, people have been unable to work, there's no internet, and we're talking access to energy. And some jurisdiction in the world has recognized in other countries energy as a right. And I think that this is a time to rethink how Puerto Rico can develop a legal framework that can be in accordance to the necessity after Puerto Rico, not before Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria. So those questions, I'll leave it on the table. And at the end of the day, thank you for your time, and I'll be ready for any question that any of you have.
Thank you, Carlos. This is Professor Velez Martinez. I wanted to add two things that are related to what Carlos just mentioned, and one is that the current emergency migration pattern that we've seen from Puerto Rico, it's more dramatic right now, but it joins a migration pattern from Puerto Ricans to the United States that started with the financial crisis. There's right now more Puerto Ricans in the United States than Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. There's in the last 7 or 8 years, more than 400,000 Puerto Ricans have left Puerto Rico and not returned. the previous migration pattern from Puerto Rico to the United States was a cyclical a return migration cycle. Some Puerto Ricans left to the United States, some Puerto Ricans returned to the island, so there was always this flow back and forth, and that is not existing right now. People are leaving the United States and staying in the United States because they're looking for better opportunities. And from an international migration perspective, I refer to this migration as internally displaced people, and I think that Professor Bird used the term refugees, which I think it's aptly used at this moment, because although under the United States law, migrants that are moving to the United States or elsewhere due to natural disasters are not considered refugees, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees does consider them as internally displaced because they're not moving across borders, since Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens and colonial territory of the United States. This is really an internally displaced population, very similar to the one regarding Katrina. And that is going to present challenges in Puerto Rico, whether Puerto Rico is going to have enough, the people that it needs for its reconstruction, but also how are these people going to be treated in the U.S. and whether their host communities are going to have the resources needed to absorb them and help them. And regarding access to justice issues that Carlos brought up, one of the things that we need to remember is there is a curfew in place that has been in place since the hurricane. The government, by executive order, imposed a curfew that was originally a 6 to 6 curfew, and now it's a 9 to 5 curfew, but people are prevented from going outside. They have to stay inside, and I think that this is something that could be challenged in terms of whether the government has authority to impose this curfew for such a long time. And this is coupled with the progressive militarization of the island, of having tanks in the streets. We have not only military personnel, but personnel that seems to be paramilitary personnel with rifles and assault rifles in the street, which are illegal to carry in Puerto Rico in most instances, unless you're military. There was an interesting news piece by the Center for Investigative Journalism that highlighted how they have tried to identify who are these people that are wearing ski masks and that are like private security, Blackwater type of, and they're intervening with civilians and with people in the street and telling people what they can do and they can't, and there have been some incidents already, and no one is really sure who these people are. The Center for Investigative Journalists tried to get a response from the U.S. Attorney's Office on whether this was something that was legal and who these people were, and she didn't have an answer, nor did the head of security for the Puerto Rican government. So this is a growing concern for civil rights. And as Carlos mentioned, the courts are closed, so there's an issue of access to justice for example, women in domestic abuse relationships. We know by the publications for the National Violence Resource Center, Sexual Violence Resource Center, that after natural disasters, there is a spike of sexual abuse and domestic abuse related incidents, and I don't think anyone is addressing that in Puerto Rico right now, and certainly the courts are not open for that. So those are also some of the issues regarding civil rights that I can highlight at this time.
Great. Thank you both for your presentations. We're sorry about that. We ran into a little bit of technical difficulties on our end, but I believe Paula wanted to say something briefly after Mr. Perez had spoken. So Paula, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I think Sheila wanted to say something.
Okay.
I just did.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Well, we were in the middle of Attorney Byrd's presentation when we could get cut off. So if we would like to give her the respect and have her present the rest of her presentation. So without further ado, here Attorney Byrd is again. Thank you.
No, thank you, thank you. I think it's actually it's kind of a blessing in disguise that I got cut off halfway and I was able to listen to everyone else's input and insight, because it does play very well into the remainder of my presentation. It's kind of interesting actually how I do agree with Professor Velez actually that, yeah, it's interesting. I hesitate to say too much. It's interesting how politically, how technically these, it's unfortunate everything that's happening in Puerto Rico, how they're not fleeing from conflict per se, it's natural disaster, and we'd like to think that they're migrants, they are, and it's unfortunate how in the press they called refugees. I do hope that everything can be repaired over there. It's kind of, I hesitate to say anything too political, so let me just get into the second half of my presentation. I left off where when we have a large group, this large influx of people coming into, again, the state of Florida, seeing as how Florida has such a large group of Puerto Ricans, that there's going to be an issue of the state being accommodating their civil rights and their needs for public assistance. But the second issue would be, how do we accommodate these people, refugees, migrants, whatever the status is, based on what they're leaving, and I'll use the correct term, migrants. The issue would be then, how do we help them integrate economically?
It's okay, it's okay.
And in this case, there are two different types of flight, and I want to touch upon what was stated earlier, that there are, there is a greater flight now than there was before. Prior to the hurricane, there was a flight as a result of the debt crisis. And I recall actually seeing on one of the news channels that there was this doctor reporting on that, how he had chosen to stay on the island to man an emergency crisis unit in the hospital because all the other doctors had already fled to the United States. That he had made it actually his duty to stay there to provide emergency services to people in his municipality. And that made me think about what could be happening now or in the near future when we see more people fleeing to Florida in particular, that we're going to see more of a brain drain. More professionals coming here. We're going to see a lower income probably pumping into Puerto Rico as a result of professionals who can earn higher income, and more higher income actually incidentally coming into Orlando, Florida in particular, Orlando being the higher population of Puerto Ricans in particular in the state of Florida, and which could be good for Orlando if you think about it, because it could increase worker productivity, increase more money into the economic stream of Florida. We could have some professionals choose to open up small businesses, and that again would increase per capita income. Those monies could end up feeding into the monies that the state may have available to provide public assistance to those who flee here, who have less, who are more in want. However, again, there's that second population who I referred to earlier, those who are in want, who do need public assistance, and if the state does not have enough, because the demand is so high and the supply is so low, well, who can help? This is where I would look to, or I would propose, private alliances between the non-governmental organizations, advising pro bono help from law firms. This is something I understand the American Bar Association is looking into. And it's interesting. We're already seeing that. Again, this is something that was already mentioned previously in Orlando, especially. The Puerto Rican diaspora is amazing. They've already sent so much water and food, batteries, diapers to Puerto Rico. And again, like was already mentioned, the issue seems to be distribution, not so much number of supplies, although supplies are always incredibly important. So when it comes to what has already been done by private individuals or even small organizations like United Way, Second Harvest Food Bank, or CASA, or some other organizations, we're seeing this effort to help Puerto Ricans survive on the island. However, once they get here, we're going to have to figure out a way to help them to thrive And that is going to be by way of, again, state assistance in combination with the coalition of private sector entities. You know, something I would propose, I would think would be very useful would be having chambers of commerce unite together to prepare, if you will, sort of lists of available opportunities, whether it's in the way of jobs or any other sort of assistance, and make sure to put these populations on notice. There are already efforts to, you know, promote notice on Mexican nationals, and we could see that for the Puerto Rican population, because this is going to be a large population that will suddenly be in need, in help for assimilation. And ultimately, again, and this is very much to be kept in the forefront of policymakers, of everyone's mind, is that this ultimately is a result of worsening natural disasters and poor infrastructural ability to respond and to rebound from these natural disasters. And I definitely think it does force us to give pause, to think about how to restructure the infrastructure, how to, you know, it's very interesting. I'm definitely not the energy expert, but all structure, electrical grids, or what have you. But at the end of the day, like I previously presented, it's interesting how natural disasters, and it's horrible, how natural disasters can ultimately affect civil rights. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Attorney Byrd. And again, we do apologize for the technical difficulties during your presentation. But I would like to first off thank all three of our presenters for their speeches and all of their information that was provided with regards to the impact of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico. And I really think that the background that you guys have all provided will really facilitate a deeper discussion when we have our questions right now. So the first question that I'm going to pose to you all is, Hurricane Maria has revealed the intense vulnerability of Puerto Rico's food supply chain. And as you spoke to, Puerto Rico imports about 85% of its food. And with the transportation limited as a result of the storm, many areas are still lacking access to food and clean water, as you have spoken to. Hurricane Maria destroyed an estimated 80% of the island's cash crops, and caused significant damage to livestock industries, resulting in roughly $780 million in agricultural years, which was according to the Department of Agriculture. This news is clearly devastating to Puerto Rico's emergent agricultural sector, which is a source of growth in an otherwise anemic economy. So my first question is, as concerns grow how funds and materials will be distributed, how can federal and local governments recuperate the agricultural sector to make Puerto Rico less susceptible to disruptions in the supply chain?
So I can tell you that I just read I read a news report about a farm in Puerto Rico that had gone completely solar, and it's one of the few functioning farms right now in Puerto Rico, and they were able to continue up and running, and they had greenhouses that resisted the storm because they had anticipated this possibility and they had prepared for this. So I think that a move to self-sustainability and sustainable power sources are going to be indispensable for the reconstruction of Puerto Rico in general, but also the agriculture in particular.
I would like to add, because I have a 1-year-old kid, and we're gonna be returning to Puerto Rico Saturday. My first concern was milk, to the kid, and I just made my research, and you can find local milk that is regulated by the Department of Puerto Rico Agriculture, and you can find local milk in the supermarket. Second, I would like to add the following: a lot of things that I have read in the news talking about borders, supply, distribution. Borders are subject to federal jurisdiction. Everything that comes in and out of the island is protected, Custom Border Patrol, subject to agriculture inspection. Everything U.S. Postal Service, a lot of people are complaining, including that they're sending packages to Puerto Rico and they're not being delivered and they're lost in the way. But that's subject to federal jurisdiction. U.S. Postal Service is subject to federal jurisdiction. And the question is very good, very interesting. How you can, the local federal government and the Puerto Rico government can communicate. But that's the issue. When you don't have internet, when you don't have telephone. When I was a kid, they told me, someone talk, someone listen, but there's a channel of communication. But if that channel of communication is missing, there's not an effective way of communication. And perhaps we went too technological with 5Gs, LTEs, and all this kind of technology, but the only radio station that survived this hurricane, it was just one, not even the government radio station, not even a multinational radio and TV station. It was just one old radio station that survived, and it was because they changed from digital to analog, their programming, and they were able to provide the news, and then the governor started using the station, the U.S. service started using that radio station as a way to communicate. So also is perhaps to think about technology, but do we have a backup plan to go back to basic in case of natural disasters happen like this? Or what are the pros and cons? But there cannot be no communication, effective communication, when the channel of communication are missing or are up and down.
Right, they're little unsteady, and that doesn't help the efficacy of the communication avenues. So I definitely agree with that. Just kind of as a side note, if you would like to pose your questions to the questions board, if you click on questions and go ahead and just submit them that way, I could go ahead and include this in this webinar as well. So just to follow up on your analysis there, what about housing? There's already a housing crisis in Florida, and even people with money can't afford can't find affordable housing, and families are living in motels and facing eviction at this point. So what should they do in this aftermath?
For me, it's funny because I just rent an apartment half an hour. Before this, I was an leasing office of a place, and it was very interesting because the landlord asked me bank statements, and they asked me about employer certification income, which are all those are minimum requirements. But again, when there's no communication, I cannot contact the company that I work for because they don't have internet to mail me that information, because they are in the western part of the island. They're not in San Juan. And when I go back Saturday, I need to drive 2 hours, pick up those letters, handwritten or even printed, I don't know. And when I fly in back in November, I will be able to provide it physically. And those are the challenge. And there's two options: either the market will understand, or either the other people. I can talk about my personal experience, and I have read a lot of landlords, they have their concern that to rent to people from Puerto Rico because they don't know if the people after 2-3 months will be able to sustain the payment of the rent on a 12-year lease, and that's a concern, and that's where legal challenge face. Constitution, regulation of state regulation, if state can intervene in that, I'm not sure, but how it will be challenged, I think that it will be a case by case, and on my end, well, it is hard. And it was hard for me to find out. So I'm talking as a panelist, but also as a person that was looking home for the past 2 weeks.
Right. Well, it's definitely unfortunate that you had to deal with this situation at this time. But Hopefully it'll be a little bit more prosperous in the future. That question was actually posed by Damarina Alisaya and the questions board, so thank you for that, Ms. Alisaya. Another question that was posed from Ms. Libby Como, and I apologize if I'm completely butchering that last name, but Ms. Libby asked, can donations to solar panel power, solar power to resilient power be effective? And that's posed to the entire panel.
Okay, right here, so for all of you that you can see me, this is the table that I'm using. It's a solar panel.
Oh, wow.
So yes, so solar panels can provide help. The problem and regulatory problem or legal issue bottleneck that you suffer is that to interconnect your system to the you need a permit to operate from the utility unless you go off grid. Right now, the utility is focused on restoring the service and case by case, and that's a regulatory issue and under regulation, which is called the interconnection for net metering and to the utility distribution system, which is that regulation was enacted on March 8th of this year. So unless you can go off grid completely without interconnecting to the utility, you must have a permit from the utility and other agencies to do that, but they are right now not operating.
Right.
Or considering that.
And I know that just kind of off the grid, Elon Musk had actually offered to completely repanel or completely rewire Puerto Rico so that their infrastructure was able to support solar and renewable sustainable development. And my initial question was going to be what kind of barriers would be faced. So the policy and regulation barriers are definitely going to be quite impactful in the coming months and days following this this disaster. So hopefully we can see some sort of progress towards reform. Another question that we have, which was posed by Harry Labarle, should we expect any lawsuits brought against the federal government by Puerto Rico as a result of this natural disaster?
Yes, and I think there's already a lawsuit filed in Boston, I think.
Yes, for the Jones Act.
Challenging the constitutionality of the Jones Act. So yes, I think there's going to be plenty of litigation, and I think that litigation is going to include the disparate treatment and issues of discrimination against Puerto Ricans, even though Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, for disparate treatment of the agencies and responses. That I can see that coming, and because I know people are thinking about that, and I think there's some lawsuits that are certainly going to be related to civil rights issues and civil rights violations against the Puerto Rico government for the curfew, but also for the use of force. So yes, I think that we're going to see more than one lawsuit coming our way.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. I agree with everything Professor Velez Martinez just said. I'm actually really interested to see if some sort of, not only just the Jones Act, I really don't know what's happening with the Cabotage Act, if that's going to be altered or amended at all. I'm really interested to see if this is going to have any effect on whether, well, I suppose not, because there'd have to be an entirely new vote on independence. I'm interested to see if this is going to have any effect on any sort of privileges and immunities violations. I can't imagine not, because there is free migratory access right now. I'm interested to see if what happens when Puerto Ricans get stateside, if there will be some resulting discriminatory impact as to just simple access to resources, what have you, whether there will be additional obstacles to get assistance. You know, for example, you have to show, I don't know, additional residence requirements, something similar to the poll tax or anything like that we saw in voting. I'm really interested to see that, because then I think that would create a great basis for a federal lawsuit. Again, I think only time will tell. Right now, though, the one thing that does pop to mind is the Jones Act. I think for one is the discriminatory application for the Jones Act waiver is only for 10 days instead of, what was it? It was indefinitely for Harvey. Am I misremembering that?
Was it 21 days?
Was it 21 days? Yeah, that always kind of perplexed me as to why it was only 10 days for Puerto Rico versus 20 days, 21 days for the other hurricane-affected areas.
I was able to study the Jones Act shipment to Puerto Rico back, and for you, respectful audience, you can see the GAO report made by the General Accounting Office regarding the Jones Act and the impact and in Puerto Rico, particularly. And it's very clear all the antitrust and other kind of overbilling, we're going to put in these kind of words that they were doing. But one of the main issues that affect is, like in the energy industry, for example, there's a lack of vessels to bring those products to Puerto Rico, and also about how big is Puerto Rico market for those shippers. And compared to other markets, Puerto Rico does not necessarily is the biggest market to ship LNG, particularly, and or any other kind of diesel, gasoline. So most of our LNG come from Trinidad and Tobago. We're talking about, I don't want to say 100%, but regarding the information on the OE is like should be around 99%, 98%, some stuff like that. And I don't want to say everything is under federal government, but the recent decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court regarding Puerto Rico colonial or statute are clearly about what is that Puerto Rico is subject to Congress powers. And from my standpoint, I don't want to say, no, this is fault of Maria is not fault of the federal government. No, Maria, no, it's not that. What on my end, on my position is a constitutional Republican government who will be responsible of making decisions. Municipalities, FEMA, U.S. Congress, government, governor, or a public corporation utility, and regarding the electric system. So who is the responsible? It should be the governor, or is the Congress, or will be the president. So those questions arise, but at the end of the day, what will happen to our legal framework, APA, EPA permits, all this kind of permits and bureaucracy, those things will be bypassed on those federal agencies to help and make sure everything goes through in Puerto Rico, and the decisions are going to be taken by those people in the table, or there's going to be a proper filing of proposal, RFP, public hearings for people to present public comments, like it happens when you're going to have, for example, when we're talking about the grid, when you talk about doing power generator plants, you have a lot of environmental compliance that you need to provide, a lot of permits, etc. So those permits, they're going to have an expedite process. Those are going to have a waiver. They're just going to be access, or it's just going to be just one decision. Let's do it. Boom. And that's for me the call that it must be to be taken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of political changes, what kind of political shifts are going to result as the migration from Puerto Rico progresses in this aftermath. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what kind of regulations and lawsuits come out of this. So thank you very much for posing that question, Harry. Another question that we have comes from Miss Dorothy Hill. says, does anyone know about Puerto Rico's plans to permit pro bono legal assistance by lawyers who are not barred in Puerto Rico, such as allowing attorneys barred in other jurisdictions to temporarily be admitted like Texas did? I know we're going to be having some slides, or the slides that are up right now, address the links that could help with regards to pro bono, but that question is posed to the panel, so if anyone would like to address the ability of lawyers to provide pro bono assistance to those who really need legal assistance in Puerto Rico.
This is Professor Velez. So there are certain areas of law that you do not require to be licensed in Puerto Rico to offer assistance. For example, bankruptcy issues, for example, Social Security, administration-related matters, tax-related matters, immigration-related matters. So there's already areas of law that are confined to federal practice that you don't need a Puerto Rico bar to engage in practice of law in those areas. I think that people sometimes are unaware of that. So that I know how zealous is the Puerto Rico Supreme Court about its jurisdiction, and Puerto Rico has zero reciprocity with any state because it's mostly a civil law jurisdiction. So I don't have a lot of hope for that happening unless it's someone that it's working and assisting a Puerto Rican attorney. What I do know is that there are already the Inter-American University School of Law has already set up a series of workshops across the island, and they are receiving attorneys that want to work pro bono in disaster-related relief, and they have already started working on that. So anyone that is interested, they might try to contact the Inter-American University School of Law Associate Dean, who's, I think, it's a person sharing that effort, and that might be a good place to start for those that want to help.
I just want to add that the U.S. District Court, you can apply private with a member of the bar, but also on Puerto Rico bar, on the clerk, you can file like a private. This was recently decided by the Supreme Court that you can attorney from the mainland can and admit in other jurisdiction can attend with another attorney, like attorneys said, and they can file, but they need to register themselves to the before the clerk of the U.S. Supreme Court. How is the process? I think I don't want to jeopardize, but there's some kind of. But yes, indeed, you need to be with other attorney admitted to the bar in Puerto Rico. That's a fact. But there's a resolution of the Supreme Court clearly regulating that practice. It's a 2016 regulation, I think. Don't quote me on that one.
Well, thank you very much. We definitely have the links here available if you would like to participate pro bono in Puerto Rico. They definitely do need the legal assistance, and I'm sure it will be highly appreciated to have experienced and reputable attorneys to support them. I just have one final question posed by one of our audience members. In terms of evictions and the kink to the FEMA Individual Assistance Program, are you in touch with the ABA Young Lawyers Program implementing the FEMA ABA legal advice designed primarily to support low-income persons and veterans? And that question was posed by Edward Thomas. So I'm assuming that has to do deal with the actual low income and veterans aspect of pro bono support.
So I know that Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge has a clinic that works closely with the Young Lawyers Division, and they are already in communications with the Inter-American University School of Law Clinic to work collaboratively in this with their disaster relief clinic and the ABA Young Lawyers and FEMA. So I know that's on the way.
Any other responses? Nope. Perfect. Well, if any other of our audience members has any further questions regarding this webinar, they can be posed online to either Sheila, Paula Shapiro, or on the ABA website. So on that note, I would like to personally thank you for allowing me to moderate this event, this webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really do appreciate you having me moderate this webinar for you. So I would like to, at this point, maybe turn it back over to Professor Ahmad. Thank you.
I want to thank our esteemed panelists. I also want to thank our moderator, Tiffany Sanchez. Before we conclude the program for right now, I wanted to also thank our staff liaisons at the ABA, especially to thank Paula Shapiro, Tanya Terrell, as well as Kristen Gallus. And also I wanted to thank the other members of the committee leadership for the Environmental Justice Committee, Scott Badnock, Stephanie Traeger, Emily Bergeron, and Jeremy Orr. There has really been a perceived support of racial injustice by the federal government based on the slow response to the storm in Puerto Rico, and there's been a real failure to address this humanitarian crisis, and this has been a concern that's really that's been brought up, you know, both in the popular culture as well as with other political activists as well. And so it was even mentioned last night at the BET Hip Hop Awards by the rap artist Eminem. And so really we're following up to see, you know, what can be done on the ground to help those who are in need. And the ABA is supporting the Louisiana Civil Justice Center's hotline. And if you can look at slide 3 on the PowerPoint presentation, the Louisiana Civil Justice Hotline has agreed to expand its coverage to include Puerto Rico along with the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the work that they are undertaking really goes to what the topic of our webinar is about, addressing the basic human needs and providing the legal information and advice that would help provide a path towards shelter and other necessities. The ABA and the Louisiana Civil Justice Center have been working so that the hotline is up and ready to go and to handle the larger capacity along with the language issues. And we're also working to see that that there is a need for more pro bono attorneys who are licensed in these territories, so that they can take case referrals from the hotline, especially in need of Spanish-speaking attorneys. The hotline really serves as a legal information hotline, but it has an important job of coordinating intake as well for the involved cases, and it also does work relating to individual pro bono counsels who are licensed in these jurisdictions. And the particular legal issues that we have been looking at for assistance include landlord-tenant issues, unemployment, FEMA, and other federal benefits. So to the extent that the legal issues, and you've heard about this during the webinar, involve FEMA and federal benefits, and they're also based on our understanding of legal advice that's rendered and on research by the American Bar Association. A pro bono attorney that's not licensed in Puerto Rico can still render legal advice as long as there are certain disclosures that are made and that there is an adherence to the federal law regarding those issues. So I think that, you know, it's important to look and see how these issues are playing out. And also we wanted to let you know that the ABA, through the ABA Center for Innovation, is working to modify Floodproof, which is a web-based platform and smartphone app that is used in Louisiana post-August 2016 floods. And the goal here is so that they can modify local law content in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, so that there is a way to assist homeowners with collection of data and the documents necessary to establish home ownership. And this is a requisite for FEMA assistance and other types of recovery funds. And this is very important for the legal issues that arise post-disaster. So if you're looking at slide slide 3, you'll see that if you are a Hurricane Maria disaster survivor, there are the legal hotlines that are available to you, and there's also specific FEMA assistance that will be provided, and so you will have access to this PowerPoint, and you can also share this with your clients and anyone that's been affected by the disaster. So if you look at the next slide, there's an overview of federal disaster assistance that shows information about FEMA training, along with specific tips for applying for assistance, whether it's through the Small Business Association as well as other avenues that are available through the federal government as well. And if you look at the last slide that we have, if you are an attorney and would like to assist in Hurricane Maria's relief efforts in Puerto Rico, there is the Louisiana Civil Justice Center, which I had just mentioned, which is working to coordinate specific activities relating to Puerto Rico and how their specific disaster legal assistance. And so even though Puerto Rico has not enacted the Katrina rule, which would allow attorneys not barred in the jurisdiction to provide legal assistance, and currently the court system is not set up and functional to make a declaration waiving the requirements, I think it's important to see, that the need for legal services is really great in Puerto Rico. And so, we're looking for specific types of assistance. And so if anyone is able to do that, we would really appreciate that. There is also a Google Documents form that has the link to it, which can provide assistance for those that are in need and have been impacted. So attorneys that are barred in Puerto Rico, we especially need them to help respond to the referrals from the hotline. And we also are looking for mentors which have substantial experience with federal disaster issues, especially relating to FEMA claims and the appeals, to provide the technical assistance and mentor those who are the boots on the ground attorneys who may have more limited training and experience. And also, especially for those who are in Puerto Rico, we need Spanish-speaking attorneys. There's also a specific Google Docs volunteer form from this, and all these efforts are being coordinated through various entities within the ABA, along with the Young Lawyers Division of the ABA, specifically the Hurricane Recovery Resources, and they have been working to provide assistance based on these hurricanes and disasters as they have occurred. And so, with that, if there are any other questions, we will provide another opportunity if you would like to address any or raise any questions that you may have. So I don't see any additional questions right now. So with that, we really want to thank you for your time in participating in this webinar. We have many more exciting webinar programs that are coming up in this fall term, as well as into the 2018 year. And if you have any specific ideas or topics that you would like to have shared for these webinars or information programs, please contact Paula Shapiro at the ABA, and she will be glad to share those ideas with us. Thank you very much.